people who do it every day for a living, we kind of feel sometimes it's a bit of a grind, but we all live for that moment I just talked about when we're in the zone. We're all junkies. Well, speaking for myself, we're kind of looking for that moment, and that's what keeps me going, And of course, doing a show like this is just thrilling.
Justin Mortimer is a London-based painter who first gained recognition in 1991 when he won the BP National Portrait Award at the remarkable age of just 21. This prestigious award launched Mortimer's career in professional portraiture, leading to a widely publicised commission painting the late Queen Elizabeth. While this career-defining moment thrust him into the spotlight, it also marked the beginning of his departure from this form of traditional art. Shifting his focus to darker, more complex facets of the human experience, Mortimer began to reinvent his artistic identity. Today, his work blurs the line between deeply personal reflections and broader global and social commentaries. On the occasion of the opening of his latest solo exhibition Veil in South London with OHSH Projects, I sit down with Justin to discuss the ideas behind the show, his artistic legacy, and the role his practice plays in understanding the world around him.
Justin, first of all, thank you for agreeing to do this, and congratulations on the show. Now, I know that this is far from your first rodeo, but how does it feel, even at this point in your career, a couple of hours before you show the world this culmination of what goes on in that studio space?
It feels good, actually. You're working on your own for hours, as you say. You don't speak to anyone. You kind of almost forget how to speak and interact properly, kind of dysfunctional artist stereotype. I'm taking a different tack from my normal everyday experience, but all artists, in the end of the day, we're probably all quite narcissistic and really enjoy showing what we're up to, unveiling our inner kind of strange ideas and thoughts that, in fact, I don't actually know what they are myself, but they only become apparent, my ideas, when I see their work put together in a coherent whole, which we have right now in the exhibition.
Where did the title Veil come from?
Yeah, it's something we had to think about quite a bit. The guys here at OHSH and I, we had to put our thinking caps on quite a bit to find a word that was succinct and that somehow was a summation of all the ideas that were apparent in the works, the hidden. I sometimes in my work try to obfuscate quite a bit. I tend to hide things a fair amount in my work, and things not just physically veiled, but also perhaps emotionally and intellectually, perhaps. I think things are not too obvious,
What are some of the things that you've hidden then?
Perhaps anxieties that I may be interested in, contemporary historical events, ideas about what it is to be alive, owning a body, being human, ideas like that.
Now, it's broken into 3 series. What separates these series? What makes them sort of unique and complete in their own way, as opposed to it just being under the umbrella of one body of work?
I do tend to work in series. I get fascinated by one idea and just plow that, just dig through that for as long as I can, as long as it keeps giving me feedback. So for a year or so, I've been making work involving washing lines. Yeah. The most banal things we all see. But of course, they're quite beautiful, but I wanted to take it beyond that. I'm very moved by it. It sounds quite strange. I'm quite emotionally involved when I look at washing, because they become portraits. They're the husk. They should be a person inside a pair of pants or a shirt. They still hold the presence of that person. So when you find a piece of clothing just tossed away or thrown or found in a tree or something like that, I have to ask myself questions. What happened here? What's the story before this event? And especially when you look at events that people have lost their lives, for instance, but there's often a shoe left after, say, a stadium crush. Dreadful images like that. They're almost, for me, more moving, these traces, these remains, than seeing a body or a dead person, And so that's all there in the work. But of course, the shapes of the clothing or the sheets hanging in space are just wonderful for an artist to get stuck into. We all have our visual tropes that make us get really interested. So for me, it was the hanging colours, the shapes, the the way a piece of clothing on a washing line can puncture a canvas. It can also hide the protagonist. So that was that series, the Pelt series, the husks, the shells, all that of proxy skin, perhaps I should be talking about. Then there's some other works here from a large body of work called Kammer, which is a German word, which I presumably have totally mispronounced, but it evokes a chamber, a room, a bedroom. And I wanted to explore the idea of a person stuck in a room. For various reasons, I happen to be using source material from medical books for the starting point, the catalyst for these works. Somebody lying on a bed, surrounded by whatever things they have to hand. It could be bed sheets again, or it could be food, things like that. But what's important here, that there are screens in the work, plasma screens, TVs, and they're kind of broken as well. But also the walls of the chamber. I'm not painting walls as we recognize them. They are often, it's a picture of a landscape that in some work are punctured by a doorway. So the trompe-l'oeil effect you have as a realistic picture is deconstructed. So there are mountains in my rooms. There are the shapes of the bedclothes are echoing the shapes of the mountains, and these sort of rhythms are going through the work. And somehow, I can't really pinpoint exactly what it is, but it's just an innate feeling I had that I wanted to have a projection of the inner world of this person stuck in this room. And maybe they're fantasizing about the outside somehow. An idyllic outside, a ridiculous holiday destination place, perhaps. And so hence these wonderful mountains, and it's not a landscape I know well. I don't inhabit a landscape like that. I inhabit an urban landscape, so it's kind of a fantasy.
Are these real spaces?
Yeah, they are.
Are they German?
Yes, sometimes I use images from old travel brochures, 30-year-old, 40-year-old travel brochures. They could be Austria, they could be the Tyrol, they could be a Swiss canton, it could be anywhere. I'm not entirely sure.
I feel like we should probably do the third one now.
Yeah, the drawings. The drawings was something that just came out of nowhere for me, and it's been a real joy to make these works. I was the kind of boy, like every other boy, who enjoyed drawing. So that's what I did all the time. And then it wasn't until much later I suddenly had to take on this burden of becoming the artist. So drawing was always a real love for me, and I think it wasn't. And my art teacher when I was at school, she really encouraged me to carry a little sketchbook in my pocket all the time, and I saw the world through the lens of my sketchbook. That was the way I interacted, in a way, to the point where it also almost became problematic. Probably in my mid-30s, I probably stopped drawing almost altogether, and I found it quite difficult. I got quite blocked, And 20 years later, I was on holiday maybe last year, and I picked up an old sketchbook that someone had given to me as a Christmas present in the 80s. And I thought, this is a beautiful book, but not too beautiful that I can't mess it up with the drawing, I'd already ripped some pages out of it already, so it was kind of warmed up nicely, And I started drawing my partner on holiday, and she's a great reader, so I just started sketching her like I used to, And it felt really nice. And it wasn't a total disaster. I mean, they were pretty rubbish drawings. So anyway, I spent 4 weeks on holiday in France doing this last year. And I thought, what, I want to somehow take these drawings, this language, but incorporate my painterly touch and language as well. So that's how I came across this, I didn't invent it, but this technique of oil paint transfer drawings. It's kind of like a monoprint. And artists such as Paul Klee used it and various things. I just like the way the ink line is dispersed and broken just visually by using the ink transfer technique, which is where I just draw on the back of a sheet of paper, flip it over, put oil paint on the back, put it face down onto another piece of paper, and just keep drawing. And you transfer it. You transfer like a monoprint. And it was just so much freedom, because you're away from the business of painting a big oil painting, or just from a monetary point of view. You're not, if it goes wrong, just roll it up in a ball and throw it away. Or you might tear it in half, this drawing, because you hate that side. You couldn't do this on a canvas really without, and then suddenly you've got a much more interesting thing which you can then glue onto another piece of paper. You can just play. I found a real freedom and the volition, the energy that was happening in the studio was something that I hadn't really come across for quite a while. So I just kept going and going and going, and I spent several months last year doing this one. In fact, I was still drawing up until maybe 4 days ago, and there's one of the latest drawing is up on the wall next to us now. So that's really nice, And I probably made about 100 drawings, of which I've probably binned about 30, and we're going to show maybe 40 to 50 drawings here. I've lost count, actually.
What's the process then on a painting? How long does a painting go from inception to completion?
Well, I mean, the painting behind me, I didn't complete it until 5 years after I started, maybe 4 years after I started it.
Is that normal?
Not necessarily, no. But I think the older I'm getting, the more indecisive I'm getting, or maybe just less happy, less content with what I've done. So I will go back to an old canvas and think, you know what? Actually, it could really do with a current idea being invested into this picture. I mean, this particular one behind me, I paint more. What you can see is more or less what I painted in 2020. And the young toddler in the painting, I painted in 2020, 2021. And then I completely obliterated her. I took her out. So it just became a painting about the woman on the bed and her interaction with a broken plasma screen or her own psychosis which was happening. And I kind of regretted that I took the girl out. I felt the narrative somehow got deflated. So again, on holiday, where a lot of my ideas come, less so in the studio, more when I'm just walking down a French lane or something, I thought, you know what, I'm going to go back in September, I'm going to put that girl back. And there was enough time from the beginning, and mourning the loss of that sort of idea and getting angry with it, there was enough space for me to go back fresh, and boom, I painted her back in about 3 days. I'm really pleased I did.
What did that do for you then, creatively or artistically?
Yeah, it just opened up the whole story opened up. Suddenly I've got a tension between what could be a mother and a child. It could be a hallucination. I became very interested in the way the physicality of the girl, the way she was. She's really anxious about approaching this adult who's kind of saying, "Calm, calm." And she's kind of. It was all about the shoulders and the tightness across her torso and the attitude. That was really key in that picture, and also just how it worked as a picture. Did it suddenly make the picture into some mawkish domestic story? I don't think it did, so I just kept going. And of course, when you retouch paintings, it can be really dangerous, because the whole thing, the brush marks and your ideas can start to spread like a virus through the whole work, and before you know it, you've completely obliterated something to your regret, So I had to rein in myself quite a bit on that and keep stepping back.
Was it normal then for you to just start a piece, complete it, and kind of see it through, or do you like to do it in these key stages? Not necessarily always over 5 years, but maybe over periods of weeks, months.
I mean, a lot of the work here, especially with the Pelt series, I did a canvas every fortnight, and it was quite a productive time. I think it's from January to May last year. I just did a painting within a month, within 3 weeks, And there's a lot of preparation that goes in before that. And the way I tend to work is...
I guess then, what's that starting point for you?
Yeah, so I can talk a bit about that. I mean, I tend to work quite digitally with my ideas initially, maybe less so now with the drawings that have come in to my world again. But yeah, my studio's full of books and old magazines and photographs I've taken, a kind of an old archive of stuff that I've collected and I'm interested in. There could be medical books, war books, travel brochures, all that kind of stuff, real proper analog old stuff, and I scan them. But I do use the internet. We kind of dig around in that and find imagery that's pertinent. And I tend to use just a very basic digital manipulation program, like an early version of Photoshop. I'm just cutting and pasting really roughly digitally. I'm throwing things together. I'm just seeing what charge comes off from a happy coincidence or just something that happens which I wasn't expecting.
It's coming from a place of instinct.
Yeah, I work very much like that. Yeah. And I don't know what the trigger could be, but it could just be a shape and a shadow, a hand. And the starting point for the picture, the catalyst, Might be completely rejected at the end of the series, but but that seed is kind of how I start. So I will make multiple prints. I will print out onto A3 paper, A4 paper, these ideas. I will grid them up to a ratio that works with the canvas, and and I just pin them up next to the canvas, and that's my starting point. The next day I'll go in, I might revise my idea, because invariably things change from the computer screen up to a massive canvas. Suddenly there's problems and horrible compositional ideas, and also you can be really badly affected by how easily you can do things on the computer. I mean, it's terrible. You might make up a fantastic effect on the computer. You can't paint that. You know, you've got to think about how the paint is going to work and move, not this fancy pants digital effect, which is, you've got to really watch out for that as well.
Do you see yourself, even at this point in your career, still trying to have those obstacles the technical obstacles that you have to overcome and figure out how you're actually going to get what's in your head onto the canvas?
Yeah, I suppose there's always the technical obstacles. I think all artists deal with that. You know, my next technical obstacle might be, learn etching or something. You know.
What was the last one that you remember trying to overcome?
Spraying paint. Yeah, which I have used. There's a couple of paintings in this show where I've used spray guns. So one, spraying oil paint, very toxic, very bad.
For the backgrounds?
Some areas of background. So a friend of mine who's a scenic painter, a very good one too, gave me a couple of his spray guns and a compressor. So I was able to experiment. So I'm all hazmated up. I look like one of my painters. I've got goggles, I've got ear defenders, I've got the full kit on, the whole rig on, and I'm big gas mask, 2 filters, kind of like a big, And I've got glasses underneath the goggles, and it's the right old paint mixing the paints. I'm getting all that mix right. That's really technical, and I don't have a feeling for that, and I find it very annoying. But some of the effects were quite interesting, but I'm not going to use too much of that.
And just speaking on the hazmat, have we got any hazmats in here? No, there's not.
No, I don't think so. There are some people wearing what look like sort of plastic clothes, perhaps, but on the whole, no.
Was that conscious? Did that become too on the nose post-COVID?
We all have these tropes as artists. I mean, I've painted plastic bags, I've painted balloons, I've painted hazmat stuff. There comes a time where you just have to find the next thing. People write to me quite often and say, I just prefer your hazmat stuff, Justin. Stop painting this rubbish. Get back to hazmat. And I get that. I love painting the hazmat.
What do they think that if the artist is going to go, okay, I'll listen to you, random person.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks.
Yeah.
That's not how this relationship works.
Yeah. I mean, it's very seductive just to rest on your laurels. I've done that. I've dealt with that. And those ideas are still apparent in the works I'm doing now. The hazmat wasn't just about the poison of the environment and war and destruction and all that kind of stuff and post-event sort of stuff. It wasn't just about that, but it was also, as I've talked about before, the kind of proxy skins. There's something about skins I seem to be aware of, or seems to be present in the work. Hazmat, you're wearing this synthetic skin. You're hidden, you're protected inside it. And I like the clues that the external gives to the interior. And that's a theme that runs through all my work, a bit like the idea of veil, sort of the hidden, the reveal. I mean, when I'm drawing a nude, so all these drawings I have are often with unclothed people. And so when I'm doing that, I'm thinking about the interior all the time.
I mean, I feel like you let the fear in. How is your relationship with fear, the big scary places? How's that changed through this process of continuing to allow yourself to access these places?
Well, yeah, I mean, I really let fear in, In my 30s, fear really was present in my life to almost a destructive point, which a lot of young men feel. So I kind of went down there. I'm able now to lift up the trap door and have a look and close the door again. But anxiety, I suppose, has always been there since I was a boy, really. My body as a young child was kind of problematic. I was in hospital and things like that. And I saw things that perhaps I shouldn't have done, about being aware of how things can fall apart a bit. And just perhaps I have an overdeveloped sense of empathy. That sounds quite strange, but sees things and you can't help but feel it hard, you know. So I did make a decision about 20 years ago to paint what I'm scared of, because I think, having spent the previous decade and a half before that being a portrait painter, I kind of withdrew from that and found I had no subject with my more narrative works. And people told me that. They said, Justin, you can do this and that. Oh yeah, sure. But what you bloody painting about? And I thought, yeah, that's right. What am I painting about?
Going back to that period of, you know, of the mid-late 90s, when you did start to break away, was this a conscious rejection of that, or was it just a natural sort of evolution?
Probably a bit of both, really. I think probably all portrait painters probably want to tear themselves away from it a bit. I mean, it's a great living. It's a really good job. I just really felt that I had things I wanted to talk about that were different to, say, that rich person's nose or earlobe, or the way their mouth's set, you know. I wanted, as fascinating as that might be, and financially very helpful and fun to do, I wanted more, you know. But it did take a time to become lucid. Well, I don't even know if I'm lucid now in my work, to be honest. But it took a long time to find a voice, because learning to paint is so long-winded and ridiculous. Then working out your whole intellectual strategies and threads is another challenge.
Who's in the driving seat, the technical or the conceptual?
Right now, I'd say not conceptual, intellectual, innate, emotive is probably, those things are probably driving it, because I don't even think about the technique now, actually.
Because it's second nature?
Yeah, in fact, that's funny you should mention that. I was lying in bed this morning at 5 o'clock, just going through my head about how I was painting, say, someone's thorax or something. I thought, I didn't even think about it. You know, I just went in and did it. And I thought, what did I even? I just played it through in my mind. I thought, yeah, I just did it. And I thought, that's it. Okay, I don't even worry about it now. I mean, I remember when I started life drawing when I was 13, the idea of, or life painting, in fact, how do I physically mix that color that's a reflected shadow in someone's armpit? I mean, what is that? I mean, how do you deal with that? Or how's the paint work together? No idea. Now, strangely, I don't worry about that, you know? I'm always looking at other artists' techniques, and I hope I learn from that.
Are you still stealing?
I mean, I don't care so much now about how I paint. I mean, I still spend an awful lot of time trying to make things, render things really well, or thinking about how a language is lucid across a whole form of a canvas, and how I can puncture that with a different language coming in, different mark, you know. And sometimes I want to know about how could I mix a paint that does that, because paint all behaves in different ways, and artists use different things. They might put dirt in their canvas, you know. They might work on an unprimed canvas. They might use gesso instead of that. It's all this little stuff. And it's easy to get lazy. You got to be fair to myself, I think, yes, your question's quite good, actually, because I'm now thinking, right, I now need to work out a new language, a new idea, a little step by step, you know, not go crazy, but just little steps. Yeah. I mean, I'm drawing into my work quite a lot now. There's quite a lot of pieces here that have pastel into the paint. I've gone back in and with charcoal, and I've left that, you know. I've scraped into stuff with coloured crayons, and that's something I wasn't doing up until quite recently, actually.
Does that then change your feeling or the place that you are when you're creating these? Because if you're so focused on the technical stuff, you're in the technical place. But if you're free from that, does that then change what goes through you when you're in that moment?
Well, I'd hope so, yeah.
And can you verbalize or explain any of where it is that you go when you're painting? What's going through your head?
Yeah, I think the most successful times, maybe a lot of artists would say this to you, is when you're not even thinking about it. You're kind of not cruising, because you can just go and
go the other way.
Yeah. You've got to be aware, part of your brain has to be aware of what's going on, but the other half of you has to be quite a meditative state. And that's when you're in the zone. People talk about that. You could be doing anything. You could be a world-class sniper or something. You know, you're there. Yeah, everything's right. You're not aware of time around you. It's like that, you know. So, and those days are often quite rare, but it's marvelous when you're there. Everything slows down. Your heartbeat's there. Probably your blood pressure's probably chilled, you know, nice and calm. And you're thinking, really, you're on it. It's just everything you're doing is spot on. The drawing's accurate. You're being risky with it. You don't care. That's the really good place to be, you know.
How embroiled into these narratives do you become then? Does that become, are you trying to position yourself as the child? Are you trying to position yourself as this protagonist?
Yeah, that's really spot on, really. I think, yes, I think I do inhabit these people. I think they are proxies. Yeah, definitely.
Must be quite a lot then when you're able to step back from those worlds, that environment of being so deeply connected to something, and to see it displayed.
Yeah, it's that. Yes, it is quite nerve-wracking being surrounded by these pictures and seeing them all, because I'm very critical. I mean, every artist has to be critical because you're never going to move on. You'll just keep painting the same old rubbish, you know? You have to keep pushing and pushing and pushing. And the byproduct of that is that your eye has to be super hard on yourself, you know, which means we're not often the happiest kind of people. Look what I've done. I mean, amateur artists, they love what they're doing. I'm quite jealous of that. They're so chuffed with it. People who do it every day for a living, we kind of feel sometimes it's a bit of a grind, but we all live for that moment I just talked about when we're in the zone. We're all junkies. Well, speaking for myself, we're kind of looking for that moment, and that's what keeps me going, you know. And of course, doing a show like this is just thrilling. It's just very nice to have a way of showing this in a coherent way, an exciting space that we're in today. And so I'm able to see the works like this. I don't see works like this in my studio. They're all stacked up, face to the wall. So getting them out like this can be sometimes quite a surprise. You sort of think, this is what I do then. Okay. Because you kind of have a fancy idea about actually what you are as an artist. And when you're confronted by what you actually do, it sometimes can be a bit, okay, I bet I'll deal with that next week when I'm back in the studio.
Why did now feel the right time for a show?
Well, interestingly, I didn't actually know this was going to happen until a couple of weeks ago. It just so happened I had the work, and the lovely guys at OHSH had been to my studio, and I've worked with them several times before. They knew what I was up to. They knew what I had up my sleeve, and an opportunity came up, and then, hey presto, here we are, after quite a bit of work, you know, putting it all together. But yeah, that's how it all came together.
Look at the Pelt series, and we've faced with this event. I know that in the past, quite seismic world-changing events have been the backdrop of your work. Are you thinking of anything in particular? Are you trying to have more of a universal sense of what's going on out there? And then following on from that, I'm thinking about that period in the 90s, you know, Bosnia, Kosovo, then leading into Iraq. And there was a mood around the world. But now, when I think about the period of 5 years and how much that mood has been pulled and changed and the scale of what we go through, if facing with these topics, if it just feels the same as it did back then, or if actually there is a different sense of how you are creating against this backdrop, if it's changed somewhat with the speed and the scale and the ferocity of what seems to be going on outside.
Yeah, I mean, I've always been interested in events, you know, what's going on. You mentioned the Balkan War. I mean, wars. There was one particular moment in the studio where I did find myself cleaning brushes on a whole stack of newspapers, and there was a picture of, maybe it was Srebrenica, something like that, I'm not sure. And it just knocked me sideways. I just stood there and thought, Jesus Christ, I'm here in my studio just faffing about with painting, and this is happening to people, you know. I suppose we'd always, out here in the West, in Europe, we always had felt somewhat distant. And then suddenly here's a civil war, the most brutal, terrible, obscene thing happening, not that far away. And it felt quite close, perhaps, and probably shook up my complacency, perhaps, about the world I was happily born into.
Has that become harder to navigate then as things have becoming seemingly? I mean, maybe it's just I'm interpreting it in my own way here. It feels like the wheels have come off in the last couple of years, right? It
Yeah,
feels
you're not
like,
wrong.
You know, in the last 2 weeks, we'll go from an assassination attempt on the president to something else, and it's like that was enough. That one event was enough of a talking point to get us through about 6 months of a news cycle before, and it just got brushed off.
I mean, I used to ask my art teacher when I was a teenager, God, what was it like living through the Cuban Missile Crisis? What did that feel like? You know, and she never really gave me a good answer. But I was fascinated as a 13, 14-year-old boy with what that must have felt like in the early 60s, which to me felt like just like another time, you know. But in fact, it was actually quite recent.
Probably about as far away from the 90s as it was, yeah.
So I've always had a bit of an overdeveloped sense of these things. But then, you know, growing up as a teenager in the 80s, anxiety about nuclear war was a massive big deal. I remember wearing a CND badge, and my grandfather sort of picked me out for it. What's that? You know, he was an ex-RAF man in World War II. You know, he went through France in 44. Imagine what he saw. He once mentioned the smell of the dead, and that's all he told me.
Different generation, right?
Yeah. I mean, I come from a military sort of background in a way, and
do you think that's why that sense of war has permeated through did that soften you off or expose you to it?
I mean, my father was in the Navy. He was a pilot in the Navy, so there was always a sense of him being away, out overseas doing stuff. His gas mask was at home, a NATO gas mask with water purification tablets and all the paraphernalia of the banality of just warfare. All this kit was around, you know. And of course, as a boy, you're fascinated by that. And I used to paint little model figures and all that, and build dioramas of disasters and stuff. And I used to sell them in the model shop. And it's kind of what I do now. Choreographing these scenes, you know, and then making paintings as but there were always history books hanging around, you know, and it's kind of how I started to teach myself to draw. I remember looking at a painting in one of my dad's history books of the Battle of Alma, which is in the Crimean War, and you know, and there was all these figures on the ground, sort of wounded soldiers, and they'd all. I remember copying them because it was all. I learned how to do a foreshortened leg. I thought, wow, if you put a thigh, then put a little hint of a foot behind it, you've got a foreshortened leg of a person prone on the ground. So stuff like that, and a lot of artists I know, we all kind of got it from somewhere. A lot of artists I know, we talk about all the comics we looked at. I mean, I grew up on 2000 AD or War Picture Library. We all had that stuff. I mean, 80s, it was saturated in militaristic imagery, you know, which is different to now, and probably quite right. So
yeah,
you know.
Well, I mean, I guess, and this is maybe just again me projecting. I would have assumed there was a little undertone of propaganda around it.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, when you look at magazines at the time, a Sunday supplement, you got like, say for a man, it's smoking cigarettes, buying a sort of a low power motorcycle, or joining the services. Which is what my grandfather, well, out of necessity, but certainly what my father did, you know. And my choices were different, really. I was able to go to art school, which was the luxury of going to art school. Extraordinary, really.
Was that met with open arms at the time?
Yeah, it's fine. I was supported, yeah. I mean, I think it wasn't massively anomalous. There is a bit of creative streak going through my family. I've got aunts and uncles who can draw and have been to art school, so it's, yeah.
But going back to that period, I mean, it was less like now today, I think it seems like such a well-trodden path, and it's really easy to say, or it's easier than back then to say, I'm going to make a career out of art.
Yeah, perhaps. And we have such great tools available to us now about spreading the word of our work, you know. And that wasn't available then. I mean, I tell you, when I was at art school, we would shoot our work onto 35mm transparencies and then send it off in an envelope to somebody. You never see them again. Now it's just like bang on Instagram. So, it's a gift, isn't it?
I read in one of the interviews previously that you were painting. You had an injury in your right hand. You were painting left-handed. I wonder if that stayed.
To be honest, no.
Listen to that question.
I thought this is it. This is going to be a new string to my bow. I just say I stupidly broke my hand whilst painting for a show in Korea. So I had to strap my right hand up. It still broke. It's not right. So I'm right-handed. So I had to paint. This was in my lockdown studio, which is like a spare room at home. So I had to paint. And it's actually really interesting to see how quickly your brain, being such a plastic organ as it is, how you do actually improve. Mm-hmm. The first one's shocking, disaster, nightmare. Your knowledge is still there, but your tool, your hand, is gone. It's shot. But then it gradually gets better. But you don't have the finesse that comes after decades of painting. But it does bring in an anarchic sense. There were some paintings I made I was really proud of, which I couldn't have achieved unless I'd bust my hand. It's ridiculous, really. But there was a bit of energy and anarchic marks, as I said, were suddenly coming in. And I thought, people saying, you should do that more often. So you've reminded me, I will do that again.
For the next show. Yeah. I mean, it was just interesting because I've spoken to quite a few people who have practiced that idea of breaking the hand and trying to rebuild. And I thought that might have been quite interconnected in some way with the way that you have, changed your artistic identity over the years. That idea of kind of breaking through. If I go from, traditional portraiture to the acid yellows, bright backgrounds, and then kind of these gradual progressions. And I wondered if that was a way of trying to force a new direction.
Yeah, I think definitely, especially like you mentioned the bright yellows and things. I mean, that I was really playing around and trying to find, jarring, getting your kind of the jemmy in there and just popping open something and see what happens. And it was a great start, great catalyst, all that kind of stuff.
How do you feel about that work?
Oh man, there's been some shockers. There's some shockers out there.
Which one's the worst? Tell us the worst. I'm joking.
Yeah, I mean, what can I say? We've all made a lot of old rubbish, and but there's one or two from the periods 30, 40 years ago, which I've kept actually. I've got quite a few paintings of bin bags that I did. I've got a few of those still at home, one or two portraits. And also some of my commissioned portraits from back in the day. I mean, my painting of Harold Pinto I did in 1991 for the National Portrait Gallery.
That was a catalyst for you, right?
Yeah, that was important because it meant I was able to meet other people and do other portraits and stuff. But it's still a painting. I did a lot of bad painting then and a few good ones at that time. I was only 21. I mean, I hadn't really been painting for that long. But I still occasionally see that picture, not in real life, because I don't know how often they hang it, but since they're rehang and stuff, I don't even know if it's up on the wall, but I've got a postcard of it still, and it's on a dust jacket of one of Harold's books. And I look at it and think, that's got guts, that does. I was painting it from life. I was having to sneak off from college once or 2 days a week, and working in Harold's smallish study with him there, and he was thinking about stuff, about a screenplay he was having to do about I think it was a Kafka screenplay he was adapting, or he was adapting Capita. And of course it was a wonderful time, and Howard was really, really nice to me, really, really generous. But the painting is still, it has clumsiness all over it, but it has a sort of an arrogance and a posturing, perhaps, and decisions in it that a younger man can make.
That only a 21-year-old would have.
Yeah, and it's the same when I did the portrait for of the Queen and only a 27-year-old would make that decision about having that colour and the physical reductions I may or may not have made consciously. And I'm pleased about that. So I'm proud of that painting too.
When you look at the lineage of royal portraiture, at that point you were pretty much breaking away from that safe zone.
Yeah.
And how did you feel at that point? Like, and then looking back on that, does that, how does that sit?
Yeah, well, the only way I could deal with that portrait at the time, I mean, it was overwhelming. It was a fantastic job to get, but it was overwhelming. So the only way I could deal with it was to be completely honest with approach painting. So it's not the Queen now, I'm painting a person. And how am I painting a person at the moment? And at the time, I was painting people with fragmented limbs. Limbs were coming off, and a bit like those cut and paste dolls you get at the back of comics, where you'd sort of have anyway, the limbs would be agile and moving, and things would be shifting and not where they're meant to be. And I thought, that's the only way I can paint the Queen. I'm going to do her with body suggesting shifts and movements. And it was a bold thing to do and risky. And the Royal Society for the Arts, I think, had a few slight worries about it, but then when the palace saw it, they were actually really supportive, because the royal family was going through quite a rough time at the moment. Their PR was out the window. I mean, it was pre-Diana, of course, so she was still around, so it wasn't a total disaster, but they were having a rough ride, and they were quite pleased that suddenly they got this sort of punky painting with this snotty kid who'd done this sort of picture. I kind of got away with it. And the tabloids went nuts. I've still got some hilarious cuttings and stuff, and from all over the world. This is before digital, it went mad.
1997 was the same year that Titanic came out. You're sitting in front of the Queen, ready to do a portrait. Did you not think to yourself, let's break the ice a little bit and say, can I paint you like one of my French girls? Did that occur to you at all? No,
not really.
What was that mood like when you were there?
Well, initially I was really nervous. I found 3 drawings I did from life of the Queen, and I can see where I was a bit sweaty, obviously, and twitchy. The first drawing, they're okay as drawings, but they're not great, But she was just chatting away, and I was just trying to deal with it. And I think they were expecting me to come in. There was a podium there. There was a vessel to put my brushes in. There was a lovely old easel, and all I had was a SLR camera, a Polaroid, and a rubbish old sketchbook. And that was like my armor through which I could deal with this completely alien situation. It's completely mad.
If they approached you today, or if they had approached you to do the portrait of King Charles, would you have done it?
No.
Why?
I'm not interested in the subject. I'm not.
Final question then. We talked about some of these seismic global events and actually as well as the personal side of fear. What role does art play in how we process these things?
I can only speak for myself, really, from the subjective point of view. It's my way of processing it, and I can think about stuff and just park it over there. I think some great art has been made about dreadful situations, but they're kind of rare. Most artwork about war is often ridiculous and banal, I was talking to someone the other day, wouldn't it be interesting to paint a picture of a battleship or a helicopter or a trench? But in fact, it's impossible because it's so loaded. The only way you could really deal with it is just to paint a shoe on the floor, or I don't know, a torn piece of cloth or something.
A washing line.
Or a washing line, exactly. So that's the way I've dealt with it. It's the remnants. It's not the things themselves, really.
Justin Mortimer, thank you very much.
Thank you.